Hello, everybody.
Hey.
All right, so welcome. It's Sunday night. So it's time for our weekly panel show, the weekend edition. Hope everybody's had a good weekend. Hope everybody's having fun this weekend. Of course, we're going to give it a few minutes, give people a chance to show up both in the chat and in the studio
Yeah.
here, just seeing if who might end up showing up. All that being said, Rick, how did your day go today?
Yeah, typical Sunday. Boring. Went to church and came back and played on the computer a bit, watched stuff. I went to a park nearby and just chilled out listening to music there. So
Yeah, pretty much same old for me as well. Well, like for me, it was just you know, um, it's pretty much the same old, preparing stuff for the show and stuff like that, and here and there and everywhere. uh, just doing some sharing of my own here.
yeah.
Although it's check and see if anybody messaged me back on letting me know if any indicating if they were gonna come or not. Um, all right. Let's see now. Well, let's see. What we'll again. We'll, before we get into any intros or anything like that, we'll wait. See,
See who shows up.
yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Make some small chat.
Okay, so
Small
let,
chat.
let, let me let me ask you this. Just to give us something to talk about a bit. Now, of course, like me, I know you grew up quite a bit in the '80s. We somebody just showed up. Metal. Hey, Metal.
Hey, Metal.
Howdy, howdy.
All right. Well, how are you doing tonight, Metal?
I am very, very tired. I had 2 hours of sleep.
Ah,
Are you still going through what you were going through the other night?
No, I feel a bit better than that, but I also had like work and stuff I had to do, commissions, so I've only had 2 hours of sleep. If I wasn't on your show the other night, I'd probably be asleep right now.
Huh.
so that messed up your sleeping schedule, is what you're saying?
Oh, my sleeping schedule is even more jacked than it normally is.
Hmm. All right. Well, we have three. We have at least three panelists in here now, and albeit I know we don't have much in the way of um of an audience as of yet. I guess we can go ahead. Um, I think we'll spice things up a little bit. We'll go. I think we'll start off counterclockwise tonight. If you guys want to give your intros, we'll start with you, Metal, and then go to Rick. You guys want to? Elk's here. All right. Hey, Elk.
Hello, sorry for being late. Just finished up our sci-fi weekend television watching binge.
Cool.
That's all right. We're just about to get into the intros now that the people are here and stuff like that. So I said we are going to start counterclockwise. So I guess we'll actually start with you then. I was going to start with Metal, but then you came in, so we'll start with you and we'll go counter. So we'll go with you, Metal, Rick, and then we'll probably talk some about some stuff.
Sure, I live in the Wild West, where many of the most beautiful of the westerns that you've seen in the last 20 or 30 years have been filmed. I walk in those very footsteps on the weekends, and I am a lifelong aficionado of genre fiction, from King Arthur to Sherlock Holmes to vampires and werewolves and sci-fi cartoons and superheroes and nerdy Richie Rich comic books and Casper the Friendly Ghost. If it's nerdy at some point in my life, I probably was into it or am into it now.
Hmm. Yeah, I liked a lot of the famous studio stuff as well. The Harvey Tune stuff as well as stuff came, novel tunes and all that.
Yeah, to be honest, my hardcore comic book collecting years were Richie Rich and Uncle Scrooge and the Beagle Boys, and I even the other nerds in of comic books in high school thought I was too nerdy for them. I was scorned even at the nerds table for
Yeah.
liking Richie Rich and Casper the Friendly Ghost and
Yeah,
Ghost and Sad Side.
Harvey comics is more what you would. So if DC and Marvel are considered top tier, then like Archie, Harvey, those, and then later, of course, with Dark Horse and Image are considered like second tier, right?
Yeah.
And Charlton for a while there was probably, before DC bought them up, they were probably considered like second tier as well. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I just happened, I was remembering a cartoon that I think was done by Famous Studios that was done for, Paramount. It's kind of a twist on the id super ego bit, or the angel devil bit, but instead of using the angel and devil, they use like the gentleman and the caveman, and they show you inside the head, inside the man's head, and then at one point they even show you inside the woman's head, where you got the little, like, what looks like a little librarian girl who kind of looks like little Audrey in a way, maybe just older and looks like more like a librarian, and the cave woman.
So a little like an older version of Inside Out, the movie.
Maybe, yeah. All right. Anything more you'd like to add, Elk?
No, that's it.
All right. Metal. Would you like to do your intro? And of course, you can share any links you want, promotional links or what have you.
Yeah. Though the first thing that came to me, because Rick said like Inside Out, I was actually thinking of the older show, Herman's Head, with all the guys who were inside his head.
And it's funny you mentioned Herman's Head, because I know I profiled this the other day on the This Day in Each History segment. Yardley Smith, who is in Herman's Head as well as being the voice of Lisa Simpson, just turned 60 the other day.
Nice. Anyway, I'm the Metal. I'm a creator, as well as many other things. But I create a series of stories called X Dynamous Chaos that you can find over at xdynamouschaos.com. But specifically, you can support an independent creator by going to xdynamouschaos.com/merchandise and giving me money, because I like it, by buying all kinds of stuff of mine, whether it's shirts or physical copies of the stories that I make.
Don't we all love? Don't we all like money? Here comes the money. Here comes the money. That's actually Shane McMahon's opening theme. Anything more you'd like to add to that, Metal, before we move on? All right, Rick.
I don't got my link handy, but if anybody wants to look me up on YouTube, Cross Comics, just go over there, subscribe to my channel, try and get me built up, and if you can, just watch the videos when I'm not on. I'm usually on once a week. Lately, it's just talking about what's going on in my life and talking to chat about whatever they happen to bring up. Yeah. But eventually, I'll be back to my comic stuff on there, or putting stuff up for my comics. And of course, I have a second channel where I do gaming and snacks and all that. And I've recently put up some snack foods that I've done that I got from Mexico. So, well, I got them from something called Art Pro here in Hamilton, but they were supposed to be Mexican candy. So,
yeah. All right. Anything more you'd like to add?
No, not this time.
All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the icebreaker I was gonna do with Rick before you guys came in. So I'm gonna start with that, and then we'll probably get into like what we read Friday, and then we'll see where we're at that point. But before we get into anything else here, so what I was gonna ask Rick, while we're waiting for you guys, and I'm figure I might as well ask this to everybody. So, now Rick and I we were growing up in the '80s. Metal, was it more the '90s for you? Were you growing up more or less in the '90s?
Yes. I was born at the very beginning of the 90s. I remember most of it, so you could say my childhood was split between the 90s and the aughts.
Right. Okay. And then Elk, were you more '80s or more '70s?
I was a teenager in the '80s, and that's about
Okay,
as
so
far as I went.
you basically would have been like when you would have been watching Saturday morning cartoons, as it were, or syndicated cartoons. You would it would have been more like in the '70s then. Okay.
Late '70s. Yeah, I did watch a lot of cartoons as a little kid. What I tend to remember is stuff from sort of '80 and a little bit onward. But yeah,
Okay. So what I was going to ask Rick, and I will extend this question to the rest of you. So, as you guys know, now usually on Saturday mornings they would have, of course, each network would have their own Saturday morning block. AB, here in the states, ABC, NBC, and
And
CBS. And now I would imagine up in Canada they might have had somewhat the same thing too. And then during the week, more of what they would classify as the independent channels. In other words, those channels that weren't network affiliated, the more independent channels would usually, as part and parcel to try to do the whole EI thing or what have you, whatever, would buy up, some they'd get the more syndicated, cartoons like some of the Marvel superhero stuff, for example, or like Transformers, GI Joe, He-Man, Master of the Universe, among other things. What I wanted to ask is, do you guys have any, like, let's say, memories, fondly, I would hope, of maybe certain like Sunday syndicated blocks that you guys would catch, on Sunday, if there were any Sunday cartoon blocks, whether they be syndicated and I know from what I understand, I guess back in the '60s, they would some of the blocks that would usually be on Saturday morning would sometimes be on Sunday morning too, but that's another time period altogether. But do you guys remember any potential, any like Sunday cartoon blocks that you kind of remember fondly, when
far and
thinking?
away, far and away from me, cartoons on Sunday were all about the Disney hour at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. Disney for years and years and years was much must see TV for our family, and watching the Disney cartoons Sunday afternoon on Disney was the big deal for us.
yeah,
What
I'd
about
have
the
to go.
Beachcombers?
I'd have
Was
to
the
go.
Beachcombers on before or after the Disney show? I can't remember. Do you remember, Rick?
The what show?
The Beachcombers with Bruno Gelusi and that Vancouver or that sort of British Columbia.
Yeah, I don't remember when they were. I didn't think it was Sunday personally, at least for me, but could have been. I do remember the Beachcombers watching them quite a bit. Like there was a few other Canadian shows too. Adderley, Danger Bay.
Yeah.
There's a couple others from around that period too. Little's Toba. But
Yeah.
again, just like you, I don't really remember a Sunday morning block.
Yeah.
So, most of the time it was nighttime for Sunday. The Wonderful World of Disney, the Nature Show. What's it?
The
Muhammad?
nature thing.
It wasn't called the Nature Show, but
Oh, David Suzuki?
no, not Suzuki. I forget. Mutual of Omaha's.
Oh, right, yeah. Wild Safari, Mutual Omaha's. Was it Wild Safari?
I don't think it was Wild Safari, but something like that.
Wild Wild World or something?
Yeah. It was again. I think it was Sundays. I
Yeah.
forget what day it was, but I remember watching
too.
that. So I think that's why I announced it.
It was called Wild Kingdom.
There
Okay.
you go.
Metal, you have anything you want to share on the topic here?
Trying to think. I actually don't think I really got to watch TV on Sundays. At least when I was like really young. Maybe later on in late middle school through high school life, but when I was really young, I was getting up fairly early for a kid, getting dressed up, and being rushed over to church, and then we'd be there basically all day. And then by the time we got back, it'd be like dinner time. Then we'd be getting scooted off to bed because that's how much time we'd spend over there. Sometimes, because I would get up earlier than other people, I got to see reruns of like the Super Mario Brothers Super Show and Captain N because that's when the networks decided to put those deep cartoons on. And as a video gamer, I really enjoyed watching them. But that's not like it was an original block. It was just because it was before any of the blocks started, they would put reruns on. So that's kind of like my only memory of watching things on Sunday for the most part.
Well, yeah. Well, that's a little surprising to me because I do remember by the time you were getting into the mid '90s, I know that some the Marvel Action Hour was going on Sundays a lot in a lot of the areas. You'd have like the Incredible Hulk, the 1996 Incredible Hulk cartoon. You'd have the Iron Man and Fantastic Four cartoons. From '94.
Well, yeah, and I've seen all of those, just not
Yeah.
during that time. Like they different runnings during different periods. But you also have to remember, I grew up in Texas, which is right in the Dallas area, right in the edge of the Bible Belt. So Sunday was pretty much just dedicated to we're going to church.
Yeah. The other thing for that for me, I was going to church for a fair bit, but I remember more religious programming happening on TV at that time. Like churches and all that, or whatever. The programs that you mentioned to me, they were more Saturdays. But I'm not saying that you didn't see them on Sunday. I'm just saying.
Well, yeah. Well, and one of the points I made at the very beginning of this, some areas, depending upon where it was, some areas would broadcast them on Saturday. Some would broadcast them on Sunday. Usually more back in the prior to the night, because in the '90s, of course, that's when like Fox would have its Fox Kids block on Saturdays, and like WB had Kids WB and all
Yeah,
that
which
on
I
Saturdays.
watch Kids WB and
They,
Fox
they
Kids
started
almost
they started
religiously.
kind of encroaching on the network lineups, as it were. With alternate programming.
The only channel that I think might have done some sort of cartoon block here, probably more in the '90s when it started to exist, was a channel called YTV, which was basically aimed towards youth, kids.
Yeah, I know about YTV. I've looked it up a bit. Is it still active?
I'm not sure. I think it might be under a new name.
Yeah, because
I don't have cable, so
I've looked it up on Wikipedia before. It sounds like it does seem like it would be like the Cartoon Network boomerang of Canada, I guess. Yeah. So like for here in California where I'm at, we had a number like. I remember I think it was like in the late '80s, we had at one point the Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera that had, of course, Yogi's Treasure Hunt was part of that. Goltar, Goltar and the Golden Lance, that was a part of it. I think the Pawpaw Bears were part of it. So there are a few, and let's see, there's also another block called the Comic Strip that had you'd had karate, and from that one that had like Street Sharks, Tiger Sharks. Street Sharks might have came a little later, but Tiger Sharks, Karate Cat.
yeah. Well, apparently, I just looked up YTV. It seems like it's still going. It was launched in 1988, but also I didn't always have cable, so unless we had cable, we didn't get it either. So,
Yeah.
and I definitely don't have cable now. Cable's too expensive. It's not
Oh yeah,
worth it.
we went in and out of cable growing up. A lot of times when we had it, it's because back then it was pretty easy to steal it. So my dad would go over to the telephone line and he would hook us up with it without the company knowing.
I'm sure when they did find out, they were real happy about that, huh?
Oh yeah, it got cut off several times. They never really until they started getting the more complicated stuff with the digital boxes and stuff, right? Like when Comcast and AT&T started having the larger networks, um, they weren't able to stop us until then, right? So like they could never lock up the box or anything properly. We just kept turning it back on, but because of that, like it was mostly just Fox Kids and Kids WB because you got that on normal access television.
Right.
Is what we'd watch on Saturdays. I do have a show that is associated with Sundays for me. Other than that, even though I wasn't watching it on TV, I'd be watching it on tape because I'd be in the children's and youth ministry during that time. I grew up during the VeggieTales era, so I pretty much saw every single one of those tapes.
Well, yeah. Well, I know TBN and CBN. They also had. Well, they had their own Saturday morning block as well. Which of course would have like Superbook and Flying House on there, but you'd also have like kids shows like Gospel Bill and all that. And then in later years, as we got into the late '80s, early '90s, you'd start, well, even by the time you were a kid in the '90s, or in the later '90s, you'd have the VeggieTales starting up. But I think you also had
But one of my favorite shows that we'd also watch there because even though it would talk about stories outside of the Christian faith, it would do so in a way that had a lot of morals and lessons that anybody could learn. Was Tales from the Book of Virtues.
Oh yeah, I've seen that, and that one was actually on PBS stations for a while too.
Oh yeah, I love that show.
Yeah, and then I do know that there were a few coming. I know Gary Chandling was actually one of the pitchmen for it for a while there, where they had like the animated stories of the Bible. And then you go
Yep.
back a little further in time too. You had Davy and Goliath, the claymation children's show. I think started actually originally in the '60s, but had ran through syndication and through stations like TBN and CBN for
Ran
quite.
into the 70s and 80s, sure.
I just fell into, I'm not sure exactly why, but I sort of fell into watching Superbook, I think either on my laptop because I had it available for some reason or not. And actually, I enjoyed that show. That's something, if I had nieces, or, well, I do have nieces or nephews, but if I was in charge of a child's education, I'd actually want them to watch that. Whereas a lot of the older stuff, to be honest, I wouldn't. But
Well, which
Superbook
Superbook?
is just
Because there were actually two. There were actually two Superbooks. There was one that was done back in the '80s, and then there was actually, and from what I understand, there was actually one that they redid in, I think it was like 2011 or something like that.
It was
And I know that
2011.
a lot of the Ocean Studios voice actors actually lent their voices to that one.
I was just watching about a year and a half ago, I think last summer and last winter. And yeah, I mean, they were traveling back in time and it was good. Again, there were always sort of moral lessons to it. And there was also, I don't know, it's a cultural history. I think in a way it's
Yeah.
almost unfortunate that Europe lost its own folklore and myth mostly, and instead imported this, Jewish Middle Eastern folklore and annihilated its own domestic folklore in the process for a couple of thousand years. But that being aside, seeing as that is the transplanted European folklore now, or shared cultural history, Superbook was a good representation of it. I actually enjoyed the stories.
Yeah, well, in the original one back that came out like 1980, 81, 82, around there, the Superbook would actually transport the kids and their robot back,
Yeah.
Gizmo back in time, and they, you'd have them interacting with a bunch of, the biblical, like Superbook, I think focused more on the Old Testament, whereas Flying House, which is another one that came out around that same time, focused more on the New Testament and focused more on the Jesus centric stories.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's probably easier to do something like that with the Old Testament because there are more story, if you will, events that are happening. In the New Testament, yeah, there's just the life of Christ, which happens over 3 years. There's various things you could encounter within that, but
Yeah, but the New Testament is more philosophy than it is
yeah, that's what I was
history.
gonna.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. After you get out of the Gospels, out of Acts, then you've just got doctrine.
Well, whenever, at least from the few animated shows I know, the few Christian animated shows I know of, when they do feature the New Testament, it usually is surrounding the Jesus stories and the gospel story, the stories from the gospels. You don't really see a lot of the stuff like from Revelation or from like the epistles, depicted in animation. Mostly
Yeah, I just think the
animation.
point he's trying to make is that the Gospels you could make like a single season show out of, while the Old Testament you could probably do like 3 or 4 seasons straight of all the stories that are in it.
Yeah, that's
there's
sort of
lots of stories and great sort of pseudo history, or there's lots of great, historical-ish stories in the Old Testament that
Yeah,
have
I mean
sort of
it's the closest thing you can do to history, right? Because even if you look at a lot of other cultures, that's just how people tracked history for the longest
yeah,
time,
yeah,
even if it's not
definitely,
precise.
definitely that's it. That's how people
yeah.
wrote.
Another show that sort of did that, but it was just straight to video. I think it was called The Greatest Stories Ever Told. The Greatest Stories Ever Told. It was a bunch of kids, that they went back in time through this portal or whatever, and they interacted with biblical characters and all that. So that was pretty interesting, neat too. I forget what I'm probably messing it up, the title of it, but it was put out by Hanna-Barbera actually.
I've heard, yeah. I didn't know that. I didn't know that was more of a biblical story, because I thought that was more just world legends overall. But I have heard of a title called "The Greatest Stories Ever Told." So.
Yeah, I know there's the movie, which I'm not referring to, and then there's a series put by Hanna-Barbera, which, like I said, it could be probably messing up the title. And hold on, what did you say, Anita? Okay, my cousin's saying I had the title right, so. But yeah, they were pretty good. They would be similar to Superbook, but a slightly different dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in the original, the one from back in the 80s, it was pretty interesting how they handled the Joseph Potiphar's wife situation.
Yeah.
They did depict that because, of course, for those of us who have read the Bible and read that story, we know what she actually accused him of in the Bible. But of course, for a children's show, you can't have that being, so it just suggested that he stole something, as opposed to, he stole something more material, as opposed to stealing her quote unquote virtue, as it were, for lack of
Hashtag
better.
Me Too.
Huh?
One of the original hashtag Me Too.
Yeah.
The first false accusation. Maybe not the first, but maybe the first recorded.
Yeah, at least one of the oldest ones on record. Whether it actually happened or not, at least you had a moralistic story that people could learn from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, so why don't we move on to the next topic here then? So, of course, Metal, you were with me on Friday when we read through some of the Archie. We read through, of course, Pep Comics #4 and Archie Comics #5. Which, but the way I was reading, when I was when I was previewing it, did seem like it was going to be a crossover, but it was more It was more, you did have like the Wizard was kind of the linchpin figure, connecting all the stories together in that way. But and you did have guys crossing over, but even as Metal Eye noticed, you knew these guys were not writing these stories together because, like, I know in the midshipman, in Lee Sampson's feature, the midshipman feature, he was blonde, but then elsewhere he was depicted as having black hair. So that's one of the things I noted, that I had noticed. But
Well, at that point, it's not the writing that's not congruent, that they're not connecting with each
It's
other.
the editing.
It's the artists.
Well,
The
in
color.
general, it's the editing, right? Because if you have an editor who's supposed to be keeping continuity, he'd be telling the artists and specifically the print, right? Because you had limited colors back then, so the way coloring worked for print was like a very specific job. It would be the editor's fault for not keeping everything congruent.
Yeah, and you would think if they were doing a story like that they would, like, yes, this color, guy's hair color is this color. You would think you would know the guy's hair color from book to book. I know you're not all working on the same book, but it's
Continuity
They also
was
they also were
clearly not
barely
an
pulling
issue.
over. I only stayed awake for 3 of the 4 stories, but in the first 2 stories, I barely, if I guess I missed it, but I didn't even see any crossover. The consistent thing was they were always fighting Muscovians or
Monsconians,
Musconians.
yeah. The
Musconians.
story arc was called the Monsconian Menace, and it wasn't as much crossover. It was more like cameos. In the Shield feature, you had I believe the Wizard and Keith Cornell, the West Pointer, make cameos in the story. The Wizard more at the very beginning of the story, and then Keith Cornell, the West Pointer, at the end. And then the midshipman, you see the Wizard again being rescued by the midshipman. And then in the Wizard story, he had all 3 of the characters kind of cameo. And then you just had, I think, just the Wizard and the Shield cameo in the West Pointer story. So it wasn't as much of a crossover, and also
So at least
and the only reason I read it in the order that I read it was because that's the way it was presented to me when I was previewing it. When I was previewing it through Grand Comics Database, in hindsight, I came to realize, and Metal and I were talking a lot about this, I probably should have started with the Wizard story first, and then read it that way instead, to make it seem a little more chronologically correct. However, of course, it wasn't as much. The stories were all being done concurrently.
Sort of.
Well,
I came to the conclusion that with some time skips and stuff, like there's certain ones that clearly happened after the other because of like they kind of picked up almost where the other one. I think it was between Wizard and West Pointer. I think they actually happened back to back. But if you took all of them, you could cut all the panels up and make a chronological story out of it with some continuity errors because they weren't trying to keep it very tight. But there was a story there that you could make out of all of them. It would just take effort.
the thing I was noticing, I'm not sure if it's true or not because I was again kind of distracted, but did the Mosconians, did they actually have a consistent plan, or was it 4 separate groups of Moscovians that all got pretty much annihilated by their respective heroes of the story? Weren't they all massacred and then on to the next story with the next group of Mosconians, and then the next who got massacred, then the next group of Mosconians who got red-shirted? Or was that just, again, me not paying close enough attention to the stories? But it seemed like it wasn't even a consistent, like an overall arch villain theme. It was just the same.
Okay, yeah.
It
Well,
was like war almost.
I think the thing is that because it was different groups of Monsconians, but I think there was one master plan. I think the Monsconians, I guess you could draw them as you could draw
Country.
comparisons to like maybe the Nazis or what have you, or even the Russians to a certain extent, as Metal pointed out. I'll have him say more about that in a moment here, but because like when the Shield was handling the Mosconians where he was, that was happening in Pearl Harbor. In fact, one of the points that even I brought up with Metal was this seems like foreshadowing like 15 months ahead, because they were already talking about the idea of somebody doing something to Pearl Harbor here in March of 1940. When you got to the midshipmen feature, you had a group of Mosconians trying to do something at the Naval Academy or something, and then even when you got to Keith Cornell, okay, the West Point, that was happening at West Point in New York, so I think again this is all I think one overarching story that's I think going to be continuing in the the next time we get around to Archie again, or MLJ Enterprises they were known back then. At least through a couple months here where I think it's an I think it's one of those clear examples of the comic book community at the time, the comic book creator community at the time, considering how we talked about how a lot of them at that time were of Jewish descent, were trying to get people behind the war effort, trying to get Americans more wanting to get involved in the war and get involved in the war effort. The Mosconians I think were I get, because, and this is another point I brought up too with Meadow, because you see this in a number of comic book companies at the time. Instead of, and there were times that they actually created countries, and made their worlds bigger. I talked about this particularly with Quality. I saw this a lot with Quality and like a lot of the Black X stories, where you'd hear about these you'd hear countries like Japania, Turkovia, Germania, which were supposed to be, I guess, extensions or variations, and they'd have the real countries too, mind you, but making their world genuinely bigger than ours. Anyways, I do need to step away from the computer for a moment, so I'm gonna I'll be right back. Metal, you want to add anything to what I just said and give some analysis while I'm gone?
Yeah, sure. Especially with the world thing, like, I don't know as much detail on the top-notch kind of world, like the RG. I know more about what happened later, but a lot of things got redone by the time it formalized more into the grander RG stuff. So I'll be missing things. But comparing like the type of bigger world to say Marvel, I know, especially because of the Savage Lands, right? That the Marvel world is big enough that it has 20%, right? So like 1.2 times more gravity than our Earth does. It would have to, just because of how much more land mass is on the surface, which also implies how much more mass is underneath it too, due to surface area to volume, which is kind of crazy. It's not something that if you would notice too much. Like if you landed on their version of Earth, like we teleport over there, you would feel heavier a bit. Like you'd probably trip more, but like you wouldn't know why, right? Like 20% more gravity is unsettling, but you would feel like you were bloated. Like you felt like you had a large Thanksgiving meal for like a month before you got used to the gravity. That's how big but also little the difference would be. The other main point, because he asked if I wanted to expand on it, was when he was saying it's kind of the Germans, but it was also kind of the Russians, which I could see both in there. And I know, Elk, you know quite a bit about this type of history, so you probably get this too. Back then, at least from our perspective, and a lot of Europeans felt the same, we kind of disliked the Russians almost as much as the people they were helping us fight. They were the only reason they were kind of our allies at the time is because of the whole idea of like the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So I would definitely not be surprised that people were kind of taking bits from both of them, especially with how often, even in the German side, you would see the National Socialists and the Communists switching sides because they agreed on more than they disagreed. It was just kind of more of a faction thing, and you would see people
Well,
jumping back and forth between the two factions regularly before
the
the Nazis
Germans
actually
and the
took over.
Russians were alliance partners in
Yeah.
1940 until 1941, and they actually partitioned Poland between them.
Yeah.
The Germans, yeah, they invaded Poland in 1939, but about a month later, the Russians invaded the rest of Poland. If even a month, maybe 3 weeks or
Yeah, so
so.
even at like the point that this was written,
Yeah,
we still
yeah,
were really, really not fond of them.
yeah. They were. Stalin was Hitler's greatest supplier of oil, greatest supplier of minerals. Uh, Germany was doing a rip roaring trade with Moscow that it had never done since it signed its alliance and partitioned Poland just 24 months before. So yeah, so America and Great Britain were not fond of the Anglosphere, if you can use the French word for it. And Kanakistan were not fond of the Soviets. They saw them as enemies, as totalitarian partners.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
that's what
and
mostly
the
what
other
I
thing
saw
is
was I saw them as not even because you were saying like disconnected plots. I didn't really see it like they needed a bigger goal, even if there might be one with their leader, but with all these different ones getting taken out, I see it more as like a subversive war front, right? So you've got different people trying to do different things on a war front, so they need different heroes solving these different problems happening on this type of war front.
yeah, that's sure that's true. I was just thinking if it were done now, there would be a more interwoven plot though. Like it wouldn't just be okay. This group of evil guys are trying to attack Pearl Harbor, and this group of evil guys are trying to blow up something in New York or
Well,
whatever
I
the
think it would
problem.
depend on how it's being done, right? So, if it was done as an event, say Marvel, for example, they would
Yeah,
have a book that is the title of the event, and that would have like a more through line plot. But then they would have like the sister books, which would be the normal titles, and then the subtitle would be like the event title number one, number two. Like for example, I
Yeah,
hate
the
Civil War.
tie-ins, the
Right?
books
Yeah, the
with the
tie-ins.
tie.
I hate Civil War, but I actually really like the Miss Marvel tie-ins for Civil War because they're doing things on the side, mostly taking out Hydra. It's like her and Wonder Man are doing things together, and it actually still ties in. Like it's the same plot, being a tie-in, but it's also disconnected. And I feel like you would get both in the modern sense
yeah,
instead of
that's
just having everything feed through.
Yeah, DC's done a lot of those type of events.
Oh yeah, well just look at the Crisis storylines, right?
Yeah. Well, there was Final Night, Armageddon. Yeah, for years, for 10 or 15 years, they had an event every year. DC. You know.
Yeah, for better or for worse, I'd probably say for worse. Not a big fan of events. Crossovers can be fun, but I'm not a big fan of how, more so of how the events took over. That's been more of a problem having like one every single year or so. When they were, if they were more sporadic, they were farther apart, then the events would feel more special. You'd have more time to plan them. But they've been doing events back to back so regularly that they're just a mess when you actually go into
Well,
them.
the first major event in DC, Crisis on Infinite Earth, was to try to singularize the DC universe rather than have the whole multiverse.
Yeah, it's one of those things
Yeah,
where I don't like the method, but I enjoyed the final result of it because I liked New Earth ultimately. But there's a Crisis Infinite Earth. It's a messy, messy story.
yeah, but that rebooted the whole universe where most of these crises it would be a month book. You'd have 4 books for the main title. It would come up once a week, and then they would do tie-ins each week in the various titles to tie in and however this event was affecting whatever hero, like Blackest Night or 0 Hour, various things like that. Final Crisis or Final Night, whatever. I forget all the events. I have a bunch of them.
Yeah. So, and I know I asked you when it was just you and me the other night here, Metal, but of course I want to ask these questions again. So to hear your thoughts. For everybody here to hear your thought. So out of so like out of the four features, if you had to pick one, what would you say is the one you liked the most or was your favorite?
Yeah, because I remember you asked me both strongest and weakest. So I think I said that the one I thought was the strongest was the wizard feature, but the one I personally liked the most was the Shields comic, just because I thought it was the most fun. Like fun things were happening, but like a storyline, the wizard was just a better written story. But if I were to go back and reread one, I'd probably find myself reading the Shield more than the wizard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think your point about feeling that the wizard was probably the strongest part of the story, because based on if you heard what I said at the very beginning when we started this conversation, I think the wizard was actually the linchpin that linked all the stories together.
Yeah,
He was the one who was
What was the
encountering the
fourth
heroes
story?
and kind of.
What was that
What
up?
was the fourth story? Was that the West Pointer? Because there was
yeah.
one I missed. I stayed for the first three, so I missed the West Pointer. Is that it? I got the midshipman, I got the
Which is fine
shield, I got the wizard, but I
because I
didn't get
thought
the
the West
last.
Pointer was the weakest story out
Okay.
of them. But the other thing, it wasn't just that the wizard was the linchpin and why I thought it was the strongest, because I remember what I said. I thought it was the one that stood the best on its own out of the four, too. Like, if you were only going to read one story, you could get everything you needed out of it. It was also the first one, so that kind of makes sense as well. Chronologically, it felt like it was the one you should have started with. But that was the one, like, you could read it without reading the others, perfectly fine. I
Yeah.
think the Shield was pretty close to that, though. With like the wizard being already mentioned and stuff like that, it feels a little off. But it was fun. I liked the stuff that happened in that one. Like to me, it was exciting. But that was my opinion on that.
Having that
And
attack on Pearl Harbor was interesting to me. Just to see that, and again, it has something to do with my actually liking it when comic books reflect some reality of, not a complete reality, obviously, because we have a shield dude running around, but to have enough political sophistication to write about a reality about an attack on Pearl Harbor, even though it's by, yeah, I just thought that was great. I
Oh,
mean,
although it's
who
before it
doesn't
actually
want to know what
happens.
Americans? Yeah, well, that's what I think is great. Like, what did Americans think of an attack on Pearl Harbor in 1940 is an interesting question to me. Versus, because obviously
um,
looking back on it, we're like, oh my God, it's terrible, yada yada yada.
I
But
think
to
I
have
mentioned this
Americans
too, but
actually,
there was you can even read what people thought of the time. It was kind of expected that it was going to be attacked. Now, obviously, a lot of people who weren't paying as much attention, maybe they would have been surprised, but um, we actually probably expected more. Those type of people, like people coming from Europe, were going to route around and do it. I don't think at the time we expected that Japan was going to be the ones that attacked it, even though that is their front. But at some point, they did think that that naval base was going to be attacked, which is why it really wasn't that difficult for them to foreshadow an attack on Pearl Harbor.
yeah, they thought Manila was going to be attacked definitely, and they actually thought Pearl Harbor was going to be too far away, but they definitely thought that Manila they were reinforcing Manila. There was actually arguments over whether it was even holdable, whether they should sink resources into Manila because it was so likely it was going to be lost. But I think with Pearl Harbor, it was much less so. It was Manila Bay, which was an American colony at the time that they thought was going to be end up in a war one way or another with someone. So yeah, so it's interesting that Pearl Harbor was not entirely a shock. There was some foresight that something like that was going to happen for sure.
And I only stayed for like one story, although I had you on in the background or whatever. I forget what I was doing, but I kept you up, so I only heard most of that. the
Yeah.
Shield story. So
It was actually overall, the story arc overall was actually a pretty good story. You know, it, and I liked how it did spark, particularly between me and Metal, but I think it even sparked quite a bit of conversation in the chat too.
yeah,
Um,
it was probably good for a first attempt because this is probably about the first major attempt to do something like this,
yeah,
combine four stories. So
at this on this scale, because I know DC did actually, and I mentioned this during the show too. DC back, I think it was in one of the teen issues of, teen as in 10 to 19, issues of adventure comics where two of Siegel Schuster's features, not Superman. These were Federal Men and Radio, I think Radio Car or something like that. Radio Squad, where they had actually crossed the two stars of Radio Squad. It actually made kind of a cameo appearance in the Federal Men story. The focus was Federal Men had gone to a school, gave a lecture on traffic safety, and then you had a situation where they depicted a drunk driver actually running over a kid, basically crippling the kid, and then the guys from Radio Squad going after him, and the guy ends up driving off a bridge because he's just so drunk he can't control the car. Apparently, and it's like you have the cops sit there and say, "Well, that's what happens when you drink and drive," kind of thing. So.
yeah, so that sounds like more of a crossover. The key two characters came in, but there wasn't an overwhelming arc between the two things because the police squad didn't end up appearing in the other one, right?
Well, in that particular case, it was more of a cameo because it was just one story.
Yeah.
It was just one story. It wasn't like an arc or story arc where
Yeah,
like,
so although these four stories were sort of independent of each other, it sounds like this is the first time some
well, yeah, I mean,
major story was done to combine.
again, this is and I noted this like last week as well, with Apex as well, because when Apex and I read the Marvel stories last week, when we read like really the Human Torch and the Submariner, because when I previewed this, I saw this, they were dropping hints of a potential crossover there, which we will probably be seeing when we get around the next time we get around to going over Marvel again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, obviously, it would seem like the people that are buying the books are calling for this stuff. They're feeling that people want this stuff.
well, yeah, you didn't get really a lot of like major world building, I think, until the silver. Now, Grant, you did have a little bit of it in the golden age, like particularly. Well, I can't say as much for some of the others, but for a lot of the DC properties and the properties they ended up buying up, like Fawcett and Quality, because those are the ones I happen to read more of. You did see them, as time would go on, they'd start like integrate, kind of built, world building. You had All Star Comics come out, which would serve as the home for the Justice Society, features, and then they'd start out with the backup features, and then and it wasn't until the 50, like even World's Finest, for example, right? Now everybody knows World's Finest was primarily as the Batman team up feature, but it did not. That's not how it started. First off, from when it first came out, as issue 1 and 2 of World's Best Comics and changed it to World's Finest, it was actually what I called for those super anthologies. Okay, the super anthology. I called them super anthologies because what it was basically like the anthologies, the monthly anthologies, but what they would do is they take usually the top 2 characters from each of their properties. So in the case of World, they were under the national publication. So you'd see like Superman and Zatara. You'd see from Detective Comics, Batman and Slam Bradley. And then maybe from Adventure Comics, you might see, Sandman and or Hourman.
And then from Action, you can see
Sometimes you might
Superman.
you might get the occasional. They might throw in like the occasional like Black Pirate or Ted Thompson from Action, or Crimson Avenger, from feature. I mean, I think in one of the world's fine, but they were two. You had like World's Finest, you had Comics Cavalcade, where they would usually take, as I said, the top one or two features from each of their anthologies every quarter. These were quarterly titles, much like the feature books of the time. And I'm talking about like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. These books started out as now Superman and Batman started gaining popularity quickly. I think it only took them 2 or 3 years before they were even going almost on a
Monthly basis.
yeah. They were like bi-monthly for a long time too, and then they were monthly, and then now, of course, in like 43, 44, around there, I think, beginning of 45, that's when
I think
some of the lesser popular titles like Adventure, for example, or All American. They might go through a production flow of like they would publish 3 out of every 4. So they might publish 3 books, 3 months worth, or 3 months in a row. Take a month off and do another 3 months. That's how they would do it. Monthly. And usually, with this, and I think I've shown you guys that site before. I use as a starting point, as a data port, as it were, Mike's Amazing World of Comics, where they'll say monthly, except for, let's say, like January, April, July, October, something like that. The anti-quarterly titles, as it were, or the three quarterly titles, or 3/4 titles, however you want to put it. So, Do 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 do. Well, coming up on an hour now. So,
Yeah.
Um.
Anything else, or did you want to go on to?
Well, unless anybody else has anything they'd like to bring up or talk about, I've got at least a couple articles we could probably go through and just, give our compounding into. Go
At
ahead,
our
Al.
sci-fi weekend, we're watching House of the Dragon and The Boys as it comes out, as well as the old, or not the old, but the 2007 Battlestar Galactica. And I was just wondering if anyone else was watching the House of the Dragon or The Boys as they're coming
No.
out.
I should catch up on The Boys, but no. And House of the Dragon, I haven't heard. Well, I think I heard you speak about it a week or two ago, so I don't know much about it.
Uh-huh.
I don't
House
really
of the
pay
Dragon
attention to
is
a
on
lot
my
of modern
backlog.
stuff.
Okay, what was that, Metal?
I was saying House of the Dragon is on my backlog, and it's been on my backlog for a while. I was originally going to wait because my brother and my dad were watching through Game of Thrones for the first time. And it's like, oh, cool, they'll probably want to watch House of the Dragon afterwards, so I'll just wait till they catch up and then we'll watch it together. But then they dropped it, and then I just never bothered to catch it, like actually watch House of the Dragon. So I need to. It's just there's a lot of things I need to get through first to catch up to it.
Okay, so what is House of the Dragon?
It's a
House of the
kind of like a
Dragon,
prequel.
instead of being based on the 100 Years' War and the English Civil War, it's based on, it was called the Pragmatic Sanction with Empress Maria Theresa. In German Salic or inheritance law, women could not inherit titles, and the legal right to a title couldn't pass through a woman. For instance, if you were the grandson of the king, but it was your mother that was the daughter of the previous king, you didn't have a right to the title, whereas in England you did. So there was a Habsburg, the last purebred Habsburg emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, only had a daughter, Maria Theresa, and he made all of Europe eventually, including all of the Holy Roman Empire electors and all of his not his lieges, but his vassals swear fealty to his daughter, saying that when he passed, that the throne would actually pass to Maria Theresa. And of course, as soon as he did that, the King of Prussia invaded Silesia and kicked her off that piece of property. And the other great houses of Europe, mainly France, which had also promised through treaties to allow his daughter to become emperor, also turned on her. And there was a great civil war. And so instead of that 100 Years' War, he's roughly based the story on that story of so the king dies, and normally inheritance only passed through men, but this time he got everyone to swear allegiance to his daughter. And so his daughter goes to Dragonspur. Is it called Dragonspur? Dragon's home, Dragonspur, the island. And so she's in the island. And then his son
So it's
crowns himself and makes himself king in King's
so
Landing.
it's sort of an
And
alternate reality version of Earth.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
it's Game of Thrones. It's the same.
Yeah,
It's a prequel to Game of Thrones.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's their Targaryens. It's the Targaryen family, the original
Oh,
royal
okay.
dynasty.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
before
So,
the bad king. Yeah.
okay. So
And again,
it's related to
it's
Game of
roughly
Thrones.
based
Okay,
on
that's all I needed to know.
yeah, and it's related to real European history too. Again, it's sort of taken little bits and pieces taken out of real history and rearranged and made a story like Game of Thrones.
Yeah. And hello, Apex. Apex is in the chat.
Hey, Vic. If you're up to it, I sent you the link just in the event you wanted to join in the studio here. But thanks for popping in. Hi, Mike, Metal, cross comments. If you're working, I understand if you can't come in, but if you want to, you're more than welcome to. All right, so why don't we go ahead and move on to, because there were a couple of anime stories I saw that were pretty interesting. Okay, yeah, you're working. I figured as much. All right, well, I hope you'll enjoy the show from the chat then. Um, with that, why don't we go ahead and look at some articles here. Because there were a couple of anime, the headlines sounded interesting. See how far we get with those. And I'm sure Metal, you might know more about some of the stuff they're talking about here than any of us. So Arc System Works gets ready to rock. Dropped first trailer for Guilty Gear Strive, Dual Rulers anime. Article by Nerdigans Inc. Published back on July 5th, which of course was this past Friday.
Okay, so do you even know what anime they're referring to, Metal? Offhand?
Well, this will be the first time that this thing is an anime. It's based off a video game called Guilty Gear. The most recent one is Strive, which comes from Guilty Gear Xrd. It's the third major installation in the franchise. And which, honestly, if it follows some of the things that I dislike about Strive, I probably won't be watching it because they did my boy Bridget dirty.
They did your boy. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that as we get into. So let's go. Oh, and this weekend, of course, is Anime Expo here out in California, I believe. So
Yeah,
anyways,
Apex is saying he's going to be on the Mikestand this Friday for when you guys are going over Harvey Comics, which has got a new thumbnail featuring some Harvey Comics stuff on it.
All right. I'll see if I can put that up. Yeah, Apex will be with me. Yeah, Anime Expo, which happens every July, usually the first weekend of July. Every year. It's an anime.
So Elk should like this Friday because he was saying earlier about liking, Richie Rich and Casper and all that.
Well, the only thing is, we're not. Those characters haven't actually come into Harvey
Yeah,
yet.
they haven't come in yet, but
In fact,
company.
even though we're calling it Harvey, the companies themselves are not called Harvey yet at this point. They're actually two separate. So with Speed Comics, with Shock Gibson in it, um, that one's from Brookworld Publications. And then when we're reading Champion Comics, that one's from Worth Carnahan.
Wow.
Yeah. But these were two companies that were basically absorbed by Harvey, and continued after 1941, 42. So, anyways, let's get into and of course, chime in if you guys have anything to say. Of course, and I'm sure you might have. Once we get through some of this, you'll probably have something to say. I'm sure. In kicking off this year's Anime Expo with a bang, series developer Arc System Works has delivered a veritable burst of new information regarding their upcoming Guilty Gear Strive Dual Rulers anime adaptation, including most notably its first trailer. And here's a picture of some of it there. Revealed during the series Anime Expo panel on July 4th, the trail brief teaser introduces audiences to the familiar faces of the series leads Sin. Leads, or should that be lead? Is Sin one person, or is Sin like an organization?
Sin is a person, Sin Kisuke, who is the brother of Kai Kisuke. Actually, they get mentioned later down. And I guess they're telling the story from, Sin. Maybe they even meant both of the Kisukes instead of just Sin, from, Sin's perspective. When technically, I think actually Sin might be the lead of Strive specifically. The leads of the games historically were his brother Kai and the other main character, Soul Bad Guy, who in some ways is slightly more of the main character. I'm not as familiar with the total story of Strive. There's certain stories in Strive that I'm familiar, but as a fighting game, because that's what Guilty Gear is, it's a fighting game, there are branching stories that you follow depending on which character you select to go through the arcade/story mode with.
All right, we will, of course.
So this would be like a Final Fantasy type game?
No. This is like an alternative to Street Fighter, in a way. Oh. Though some of the scaling, it is probably closer to Final Fantasy. It's similar to some of the crazier fighting anime you've probably seen, similar to earlier Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, Bleach, those type of fighting things where there's over-the-top explosions. Maybe somebody causes a nuclear detonation at some point in time, and people survive it. But it's that type of crazy havoc-filled world. Where the original
kind of like one big melee fight, basically.
Sort of, yeah. And the original threat were these things called gears, which were enhanced humanoid things, which really, it's called Guilty Gear still. The gears aren't really a problem anymore. I mean, it's a very, very confusing franchise that you have to play it and follow it to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I was just, because it didn't sound like a, Street Fighter type fighting where you just, have a small background and one-on-one.
No, that is the type of game it is, right? It is like a 1v1 fighting game where it's side scroll between the two people. There's a background and they do combos on each other. That's the type of game that Guilty Gear is.
Oh, okay. Just because with all the lore there, it's different.
Well, I mean, you'd be surprised if I started getting into Street Fighter lore on you.
Yeah. Well, I guess Street Fighter's like quite a bit of games too.
All right, so revealed during the series Anime Expo. Okay, so oh yeah, we read that part. During their Guilty Gear special Anime Expo panel on July 4th, Arc Systems Works unveiled the Guilty Gear Strive Dual Rulers anime synopsis and a trailer which features the familiar faces of franchise lead Soul Bad Guy, who I guess is voiced in Japanese here by Joji Nakata, the son of the series rival, the son of his series rival, Kisuke.
Yeah, Kai Kisuke,
Kai Kisuke.
and Sin, which is this is his son or whatever. I said brothers before; they're actually father son. But yeah, no. God, since it's just not as fun to play as Kai, but I digress about that.
Who of course is voiced in Japanese by Issei Miyazaki, and Unika, who is voiced in Japanese by Yui Ishikawa, a brand new cat masked female character. As for the series plot, per a synopsis provided on its official website, the Dual Rulers anime will be set within the larger Guilty Gear setting and see the aforementioned Sin coming to blows with Unika over her anti-gear philosophies.
Yeah, so this sounds like an original work that is not like adapting the game, because Unika is not a character in the game. It's a character that's being added to this. So maybe it follows the story, maybe it's a side story, but this will be something that expands the lore, not retelling it.
Quote, after the decline of the once robust fields of science and technology, a new energy source known as magic fuels magic fuels the modern era, unquote, explains Arc System Works. Quote, humanity creates forbidden biological weapons, gears. Those gears eventually stand against humanity in a rebellion. The way they're talking about gears here, I'm reminded of some of the Yu-Gi-Oh cards that are like gears, like Gear Gadget, Green Gadget, Yellow Gadget, that kind of thing.
I think it's a better way to look at them as some of them are not human, but most of them look humanoid, as like living monsters. Almost like in the same way that Vash the Stampede is a plant, right? Like you have to look at it almost like that way, or how like you have like the androids in Dragon Ball or anything like that. These are bioweapons.
All right, so continuing on here. Okay. Quote, okay, we already read that part. Although they managed to overcome in the struggle for survival known as the Crusades, humanity's losses are so great that even after several decades pass, their emotional wounds remain unable to fully heal, unquote. So it almost sounds like a Pyrrhic victory here.
Yeah.
Quote, Shin Kisuke, voiced in the Japanese by Issei Miyazaki, who, and it's kind of funny, they just simply say that he just provides the voice of Shin Kisuke in Guilty Gear franchise.
I do appreciate that a lot of times when stuff like this in Japan gets adapted, sometimes it happens over here in the States too, that they carry over the voice from the video games because you get used to the voice, and it'd be weird if somebody else were to actually voice them.
Yeah. The child of a human and a gear leads to his father, Kai, and mother Dizzy's wedding, unquote. The synopsis continues, quote, their wedding breaks the ultimate taboo, a union between a human and a gear. Even with the world at peace, it took many years for such a ceremony to come to fruition, unquote. Quote, despite the complex array of emotions surrounding it, the wedding ceremony is met with with blessing, unquote. It concludes, quote, when suddenly a mysterious girl appears, the fated child inheriting gear blood, and the mysterious girl who despises gears. Their meeting would shake the world, unquote.
And hello,
Yeah,
Neil Gamer. Wait,
I saw you laughing at the Kai/Dizzy wedding. It's a fighting game, so a lot of the characters will sometimes have names like just Dizzy or whatever. Dizzy specifically is kind of as a bioweapon, kind of like an angelic looking girl. Whose wings even have like embodiments, like faces of like life and death on her. Very very fun character with a complex backstory, but that obviously like the taboo part was the important thing, where like a human and this bioweapon should not be getting together, and it's been a back plot to the series for quite a while now.
Hey Neo, welcome to the stream. Um, all right, so continuing on with the article here, then. In regards to its production team, Dual Riders will be animated by Ishura Anime Adaptation Studio Sanzigin Inc., helmed by from Argonavis film franchise director Shigeru Morikawa, and written by Guilty Gear Extra mangaka Norimitsu Kaiho. Alongside the trailer and synopsis, Arc System Works also shared a special message from series character designer, Guilty Gear creator Daisuke Ishiwatari. Quote, I'd like to express my deep gratitude to all of the team members who who worked hard on this project, unquote, said Ishiwatari. Quote, the talent, passion, and hard work have breathed new life into the world of Guilty Gear. Even I don't really know how it will play out in animation, so I'm truly looking forward to it, unquote. For the teaser trailer, Guilty Gear Strive Dual Riders is slated to premiere in 2025. So, all right, so there we go with that one. Any further thoughts on that article before we move on to the next one here?
well, I can't think of any myself.
My further thoughts would be either they should leave my favorite character Bridget out of the story altogether, which, given the story that they're doing, from what they said, it could easily be it, or they should fix the problem that showed up with the community, where God, there was a whole controversy over Bridget. It probably came up on Bounding in the comics. You probably glossed over it, where due to the nature of where they took Bridget's story, a lot of people assume that Bridget is trans, which is an insult to Bridget's story prior to that, because Bridget was a boy who was a twin that grew up in a town where there was a superstition against twins. And to allow the twins to live, they raised one of their two twins boys in secret as a girl. So Bridget was forced to kind of be a girl pretty much his entire life, even kind of being raised as a nun at one point, and his adventure was to regain his manhood. Now, there's parts of the later story that are actually kind of good for him, where it just comes down to accepting who he's become as a person, and knowing that like he could be girly since he was raised girly and still be a man. But there's more recent stuff that kind of like stomped on a lot of the character development of Bridget, and I'm not happy about it. More so, I just like Bridget because of the playstyle than anything. But you would refer to Bridget as a trap character.
Hello, Beluga.
Hey, Beluga. All right. So, anyways, let's get into this next story then. 119. So, I'm making good time here. All right. So, Toho has a quote unquote Godzilla room, laying down rules for respecting their property in every iteration. I wonder what that's all about. Article by J.B. Augustine, published on Friday. So, all right. So, there are means for respecting canons and the integrity of characters dwelling within them. For instance, we've heard of show Bibles, but they don't always work how they're supposed to, or the way fans assume they should. Nothing seems to prevent Hollywood from taking liberties with the established lore of Tolkien, Lucas, Marvel, The Witcher, or DC, to name a few. That is, unless they're dealing with Toho and their cash kaiju, Godzilla. Downey Studio, much like the rest of the country's content Americans enjoy, exists in a bubble cut off, immune to the whims of our film industry.
Which is probably a good thing.
Yeah. If you want to play with them, you have to play by their rules. And they have a few for their giant dinosaur. In fact, they have an office whose job is to make sure that the big guy is respected on screens at home and abroad. Wow! Look, you actually have an entire office dedicated to stuff like this.
Now they don't say how big or small this office is. It could be like a small office.
Yeah, but can you imagine this for a second? So you got some woke joker, right, wanting to mess with Godzilla, here in America, and then all of a sudden you probably end up having a group of 5 or 6 of these guys coming to them. Don't you dare mess with Godzilla, or else we're gonna kick your butt. Right?
Well, when you're a $2.6 billion franchise, you kind of have some value in it, you know?
Yeah. I know. Toho's quote-unquote Godzilla room came to be in the shadow of Shin Godzilla and oversees every project to protect the brand. And to do this, they enforce strict criteria for filmmakers. The room's director, Tetsuya Yoshikawa, explained in an interview with Live Door that there were 2 specific mandates, Godzilla Minus One and Godzilla Con, had to abide by above all.
Well, I wonder when they made this Godzilla room, because how did that other Godzilla get made? I think in the 90s or whatever, or the early thousands. The one that was in New York that most people don't like.
Oh, you mean the one that everybody tries to forget about, and that the actual Japanese studios renamed that monster Zilla so they can have Godzilla kill it?
I guess so. Yeah, that's probably the one I'm
Yeah,
talking
with
about.
Matthew Broderick, the 98 one,
Yeah.
I wonder how that got past the Godzilla.
I wouldn't be surprised if that room was made because of that movie.
Quote, some of the big rules are that Godzilla never dies, and that Godzilla does not prey on people or things. We check these things from the script stage for Godzilla Minus One as well. The same goes for the Hollywood version, unquote, said Yoshikawa via MovieWeb. Quote, managing the film by clarifying agreements and principles rather than just playing by intuition also leads to the credibility of the film, unquote, he added.
Yeah, that's been a thing for a while, where, like, even if you kill Godzilla, like you beat him if he's the stage monster threat. You have to show like his heart beating or his eyes opening under the sea at the end of the movie, so people know that Godzilla's alive.
Hollywood could learn from this level of care, although it's nothing new from Toe's playbook. In the mid 90s, they had a veritable encyclopedia of requests. They gave Roland Emmerich when making his 98 adaptation. He ignored the very thing you were just talking about,
Yeah.
Metal. He ignored them and freely made a film he didn't want to.
I think it meant they didn't want him to.
Yeah, I mean, very few were happy with that finished product, including Toho executives. How satisfied they are with every aspect of Godzilla, King Kong, and Minus One remains a mystery. You can't watch those movies and say Godzilla did not prey on anything beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
But as long as they made money, right? All right, so
Apex,
that one's a quickie. I
Apex
actually
says,
thought that one was going to be the longer one,
Yeah.
but
Apex says billion-dollar companies don't have to play by woke rules. They have FU money.
yeah, yeah, quite a bit. We've talked a lot about that. FU money. F you, right? Up yours. All right. No, anyways, those are the only two articles that I came up with. Let's see. Anything else on your guys'
Yeah.
minds, or
Well, it seems with that Godzilla room, although they may give them these rules, in some ways they don't do much to enforce it if they don't abide by it. It seems.
Until relatively recently, that was just standard practice, was that when you got a licensed character or property, there would be a Bible, and it wasn't. They usually weren't that optional. There was usually a contractually enforced set of criteria that you had to follow. Like I remember when Sony licensed Spider-Man, for instance, from Marvel in the '90s. Someone leaked the contract that they'd signed for that because they thought
I'll
it
be
would
right
be
back, guys.
black eye, but it said that Peter Parker had to be white, Peter Parker had to be straight, Peter Parker had to always end up married to Mary Jane.
Yeah,
It
Peter
was a
Parker had to
very
be Peter Parker.
yeah, it was a very strict set of character beats that he had to be, and it included him being white and straight, which was the funny part because when it got leaked in I don't know 2010 or whatever, it was thought of as this terrible thing. But that was
Yeah, but that's because behind the scenes, a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with now was already being pushed by people. We just didn't really experience or see it too much yet.
yeah.
The,
So
the only thing I would
it was just part of owning a license was that you had to keep the story beats of a character intact.
the only thing I think would be strange with that is, I think they could have put in Betty Brant or some other love interest at first, but if you're doing a trilogy or something like that, I could see, maybe by the third movie or the fourth movie, you introduce Mary Jane, and I
Yeah.
could maybe not even see him, depending on how many films they do, maybe not even see him married to Mary Jane, but maybe end up, if you're doing a trilogy, by the end he ends up dating Mary Jane.
Well, this is also in the 90s when superhero movies were thought of as basket cases at the time. And the only superhero movie that was consistently hitting like blockbuster status was the Batman franchise. And they, of course, aren't in order and they like reboot. They're not in the same universe. And
Yeah,
there's
they had like
definitely,
pseudo continuity, right? Like you had the two Tim Burton,
yeah,
and then like Joe Schumacher kind of spiritually made a sequel, but also didn't have to acknowledge them either. Like he could do what he wanted.
They were like homages, sort of, to each
Yeah,
other.
the four Batman movies from, we'll say, the 90s,
They're really two sets of two when you break them down.
not even that. Probably two sets, one set of two, and the other two are individuals because different playing Batman. And really, the latest Flash movie ends up saying that because in an end scene credit, after being with Michael Keaton's Batman, he ends up in the Flash ends up in a universe with one of the other two guys that played Batman.
Yeah, but and that's again, retroactive. At the time, Schumacher did consider both of the movies that he made to be the same continuity, just with different actors. But retroactively, the studio who owns it, they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah, like Apex says, Blade was one of the only other movie franchises, superhero, if he is a superhero exactly, comic book franchises that made it to a trilogy.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
Bombed out after a movie or two, but even there, the third one was not selling much, and that went out of, movie studios went out of the Blade business for decades.
That was at the end of the 90s too. So we were already getting like into the aughts as Blade was hitting the popularity. We're almost at like Spider-Man. There was another movie though that had a trilogy around that time that did great in the box office, was the X-Men franchise.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's true. But other than that, like Marvel was going bankrupt and frantically selling off to anyone and anyone who would sign a contract with them. They were selling off their rights to their characters, and
they were barely getting returns. Like, even these movies that did great, like they weren't getting much of it.
Yeah. And then, well, the Spider-Man one that they sold the rights to 2 or 3 companies, from what I heard.
Fantastic Four was sold to like an unknown, like just an independent producer, and they made those 4 terrible Fantastic Four movies. So so Marvel was just selling the rights right, left, and center, and not
there was only there was the made-for-2 TV movie, which was probably better than the 3 live-action in movie theater ones.
Yeah. So it was just superhero movies until Iron Man, except again with the big exception of Batman and Robin, were not thought of or not valued in Hollywood that highly. It was like nothing.
I'd probably say Superman was fairly valued too.
I don't think so. I mean, how many they did? The superhero.
Superman had 4 films.
But the last 2 were absolute jokes. They were Golan and Globus productions, which were a pair of productions that were famous for having rock bottom budgets and rock bottom quality.
They obviously weren't the best, for sure.
They were terrible. That wasn't Golan and Globus was not a major studio. They were like a pair of brothers that were like basically the dollar store version of a Hollywood studio. They just scraped together a couple of
Golan and Globulus. Sounds like a couple of butts with legs. Quite honestly.
They obviously didn't take too much from Superman lore at that point for those 2 movies. I think Lex was in it, but that was about
I was just thinking of the names of the guys or the studio, whatever.
Oh, they sound like a couple of alien truckers that like Green Lanterns would find at random stops. Like it'd be the same 2 guys in the background having the same conversation every time.
Well, what they were famous for was if you were a fairly major actor and you wanted to have complete editorial control over your own movie, that's what they would do. Is they would, if you couldn't get it from a major studio, which normally you couldn't because studios, they're the ones putting up the money, so they ultimately wanted to call the shots. You could actually get Golan and Globus, sign up with them, and they'd sign off on basically any stupidity that a major actor came up with. The downside being the budget of your movie was going to be like $2.5 million. So they had actually fairly major actors in their movies, but again, the actors were exchanging a low budget for complete control over the outcome. So
Well,
they
and
definitely filled a niche.
the name sounds like something you'd find on Men in Black to me. It's
Well, they
just
were Jewish brothers.
I get I don't know, or either Men in Black or even the Adult Swim comedy Assy McGee. Just this big
Well,
butt with
they were
legs.
the victims of a lot of anti-Semitism, actually, because there were a couple of, I think they were Israeli. If not Israeli, they were definitely a couple of Jewish businessmen who
But
put
they sound
together
like
these.
I'm not
Mediterranean
trying to be
names, to be honest.
anti-Semitic. I'm just
Yeah.
the name to me, like globulus in particular, is associated with rear ends.
Yeah,
So
but like, which a lot of Semitic people, I mean, they are Mediterranean people, all over the Mediterranean throughout the history. Globulus is a Roman name, actually, which there are a lot of Semitic Romans historically. It has the exact naming pattern syllabically of Roman people. So it's not actually that weird of a name. We're just not used to them anymore.
Yeah,
New
especially
World
in the
Tour.
West,
All right,
Canada, and the States.
all right, so we're coming up on an hour 36. So anything more, guys? If not, then we can probably start to wind things down a
Oh,
bit.
I was just gonna kind of agree with Elk too when talking about Superman. Is as good of a property as Superman was when it came to films. Those last ones had left such a bad taste that they didn't decide to make another one until 2006.
Yeah, I mean they died for like 20 years, so that's not a sign of a valued property.
Well, they may not decide to do a movie, but they were, TV shows and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's just it left a bad taste in Hollywood's mouth
Hollywood,
specifically.
yeah.
Well, from what I remember, throughout the late aughts and into the teens, there were actually a lot of. They actually did a lot of animated, DC movies.
Yeah, and there was also obviously Lois and Clark was a hit sensation. There was Smallville eventually. Actually, around that time when Superman starts picking back up, I think that's why they decided to do Superman Returns, which
I think
was
they did a
also not
Superboy live action too in the late '80s, early '90s.
Trying to remember. I don't remember that, but you might be right.
I'm not sure when it came out, but it wasn't that good either. But
But that's the problem. Like even as things start to resurge, like oh, the TV shows are doing great. Let's try to make another movie again, and then they make something like Superman Returns, which has a lot of potential, but the execution is just awful.
yeah,
Well, yeah. Well, I remember like when after, of course, the premiere of Batman, the animated series, and then they came out, a few years later with Superman the animated series, and that started up the whole DCAU. That universe became pretty popular for a while there.
Yeah.
There was
I
actually
also
a
I have to
couple of
fight
Hollywood
Apex
movies
here.
that a couple of comic book movies that I loved in the 90s. One was Elektra, which is critically disdained, but I actually liked. And what was the
Electra's
one?
fun.
What was the one about the? It was a vampire movie, but it wasn't called a vampire movie. It was about a futuristic world shot in real life Shanghai with all the crazy buildings that Americans hadn't seen yet. And it was about a vampire woman, the woman from Resident Evil. What's her name?
I think I know what you're talking about.
And they
It was a
called it
video
the
game
Phage.
adaptation.
Yeah, they called it the phage. It wasn't like a vampire or a blood disease. It was the phage, and they were trying to cure you of this disease. And of course, if you got in sunlight, they'd disappear. So they all had to wear
Well,
these
there was two
rubber.
that was done at the same time in the same one. So there was Underworld, which was
Yeah, that
not
I
the
actually
Resident
Okay,
Evil. That was a different.
I want to ask. So, Apex start out here. Current Superman cartoons are good. Have
Yeah,
you?
I was gonna fight him on that.
Yeah, I mean, have you actually seen My Adventures? I mean, I couldn't even get past the first few minutes of My Adventures of Superman. I've mentioned that on here before. That one, just they they screwed around with it too much to
I got through the first couple episodes, but I could probably get
I
through
couldn't get past like the first 5 minutes.
My Adventures with Superman, which I've had this hypothesis since I saw the preview stuff, and then the more it went on, the more they confirmed my hypothesis. So it's almost like a theoretical model now with predictive measure. The people who write it don't want to be writing Superman. They want to be writing fan fiction for Gohan and Videl from Dragon Ball. Which even like Lois's redesign looks more like Videl from Dragon Ball, and their personalities are more like those two people. And then when they introduce Kara, Supergirl, she literally looks exactly like Android 18, and she acts like Vegeta and Raditz did when they first showed up, with going with more of that conquering Kryptonian route. And like, they want to be writing Dragon Ball fan
I don't
fiction.
know what's going on with it, but I just know that
it's awful.
Yeah. So Apex is clarifying from the late 90s. Okay.
That would not be current.
Yeah. That's like 25, 30 years ago. Yeah. So, anyway, well, we're now at an hour 40, so I think it's a good time to start wrapping things up. So, what I'm going to do, of course, we'll do this day niche history segment, and we'll start, and then we'll of course go normal order this time and go, start with Rick and go, do the go back around that way. See, I haven't seen those cartoons that Metal was watching. Yeah, well, you don't want to. Okay, the older stuff rocks, the newer stuff crocs. Okay, so okay, so anyways, today is Sunday, July the 7th, 2024. So we're going to go ahead and take a look back at this day in niche history. History! So first I'm going to head back to yesterday so 15 years ago yesterday, July the 6th, back in 2009. 2 years ago yesterday, back in 2009. Gohan's princess lover and Feels Kana Memo, both premiered on Japanese television on yesterday's date 15 years ago. So Gohan's princess lover and Feels Kana Memo premiered on Japanese television on yesterday's date 15 years ago. Metal, either of those sound familiar to you? Metal?
Maybe he had to step away.
And just forgot to tell all of us? 99 seems like 10 years ago. Time moves too fast. Yeah, it's actually 21. Hard, Charles. All right. Well,
I think that's Swedish for has Charles. Says Elfish. And hello, Elfish.
All right. So with that, well, I guess we'll move on to the next piece of niche history then. As we move ahead to yesterday's date in 2011, which of course, yesterday's date in 2011, which of course was 13 years ago yesterday. The 15th issue of iZombie from DC's Vertigo imprint went on sale on yesterday's date 13 years ago. Sold for $2.99 with 32 pages. Had the two features in it: iZombie going down and the dead president. So
you may be a zombie, but I'm a Rick.
So the 15th issue of iZombie went on sale on yesterday's yesterday's date 13 years ago.
Elfish is asking, what is the Magi anime? I have no idea myself. Maybe one of these guys does.
iZombie was okay. And then Goodnight Spoon's finally here. Hey, Goodnight Spoon.
Hey, good night. Yeah, hey, good night, Spoon.
Poor Rickus.
You can ask. Maybe I'll answer. Maybe I won't. Who knows?
All right. So, anyways, moving on to today, as we have a couple of niche history items for today. On this date, 10 years ago, yesterday or today rather, WWE held its Monday Night Raw event from the Bell Center in Montreal, Canada. The event saw in the main event John Cena and Seth Rollins go to a no contest, and after 10 minutes of their match, John Cena, who just announced when his retirement will be from WWE, he plans on retiring at the end of next year, 2025. Let's see, among some of the other matches on the night, saw AJ Lee and Paige beat the Funkadactyls in a number one contendership match for the United States title. Alberto Del Rio defeated Dolph Ziggler. Lisa Fox and Nikki Bella in a one-hand tied match went to a no contest. And the show opened up with the Wyatt family members of course, the late Luke Harper and Eric Rowan defeating the Usos. So 10 years ago today, WWE had its Monday Night Raw event from the Bell Center in Montreal, Canada. And let's see what else we have here. Why is it 90 degrees at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday?
Haha, it's only 82 degrees here.
Heat wave at Goodnight Spoon. Let's see. You doing okay, Rick? You sound down.
Yeah, I am a little, but I'm not going to go into it on air right now.
All right. Inexcusable Apex. And Apex promoting his channel right there, so you guys might want to go check him out.
We lost
Elk. I guess Elk left. I guess he just figured it was. All right. Anyways, we have one more piece of niche history, and of course, 2014 is just so nice that we're going to hit it twice. As also on this date 10 years ago, as it were, Disney premiering on Disney XD on this date 10 years ago. The 7D premiered on Disney XD on this date 10 years ago. So on this date 10 years ago, Disney Television Animations, the 7D, premiered on Disney XD. So with that, I do thank everybody.
I have to object to something you said. 2014 was not a nice year, no matter how many times that we hit it.
I know. It's more of a joke. Okay, I get it.
I know, but of all years.
Any time we have more than one thing in the historical comic retrospect, you probably you might be right. Maybe 2014 wasn't a great year, and I know for some people it probably wasn't a great year. All I'm saying is that it's just one of those humorous little entertaining things, right? This year was just so nice that we're gonna hit it twice, and sometimes we have three things that are featured in the same year. It's not just so nice twice, but it's also nice thrice.
Yeah, well, 2014 is only nice enough that I want to hit it twice with my fists.
Okay. So the question begs to be asked: why was 2014 not so nice? According to you,
so that was kind of I would say the peak, or the the public start of the culture war stuff that we're having to deal with now.
Oh, okay.
Right,
Oh,
like
I see what you're talking
back
about.
in
Yeah.
the production side, it's been going on for longer. But where like the consumer base and everything had to start dealing with it, that was like the year. That was like the GamerGate year. Was 2014.
And wasn't that also around the time that they did the whole um, Jean Grey putting the subliminal the thought in Bobby Drake's head that he's gay, and then all of a sudden he's gay.
Possibly, I think that might have started the year after that. But I mean, that's all stemming from that. Like it starts right there,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I said around the same time. So,
Okay, so I get why you don't say it's not so nice.
yeah. I mean, I just say that more as an entertaining kind of way to do that. And I mean, yeah. But anyway, I won't press. But you know how to get a hold of me if you need to talk. 2014 is the year Rooster Teeth died.
Spiritually, not physically. Obviously, that the final death of the Rooster Teeth was more recent, but I know what he means.
Oh, you mean that's the year that Monty Ohm died, and all of a sudden everybody went like woke crazy? Is that what you guys are talking about?
Well, it's on multiple levels. That 2014 was the year Rooster Teeth died from being Rooster Teeth.
I hope 2024 will be better than 2014. Let's see. Also, I have news for metal. Let's see. 2014 was the Marvel Now first appeared in most of their comics. Magi Anime 2012. Magi Kingdom of Magic. All right. So with that, I do thank everybody for being here. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna start with Rick and then do metal, and then I'll wrap things up. So Rick, if you want to do an outro.
I'm just gonna put a link into the chat for my channel, Pied Piper of Hamilton. If people want to go subscribe there, I got some video game stuff that I've done there, some movie reaction stuff, TV reaction stuff, I think, and a little unique thing there. I think Canadian snack videos. Although I just recently finished up doing a some Mexican snacks that I got here. Somebody was selling some Mexican snacks here in Canada, and I grabbed 4 of them and did some videos for it. So if you want to go check that stuff out, it'd be nice, and subscribe.
And Elk just got back. And then Goodnight Spoon saying, not necessarily about Monty. They sold out for one, and you can see they begin recycling the same jokes from the previous 10 years across every series rather than taking risks doing anything worthwhile. All right. All right. So, anyway, Rick, was there anything more you wanted to add before we move on?
No, just on to metal, I guess.
All right, Metal, you're up.
I was going to say before my outro, once upon a time on that particular channel, Rick and I used to stream video games together.
Yeah.
It's been a long while, but
Hopefully, once I get my own place, we can get back into that.
yeah, we could do some fun things together again once everything's more stable, preferably between both of us, because I'm going to be rocky around September due to moves and stuff. But the only thing I'm going to plug is the same thing I plugged before. I'm going to tell people go to xdynamischaos.com and read my stuff, because I know you guys have not read all of it. And maybe you wouldn't be interested in all of it, but I'm sure there is something there between my web novels and web comics, or even background data on characters that will catch your interest somewhere. But more specifically, xdynamischaos.com/merchandise, because I want your money. So go buy like a t-shirt or a physical copy of a book you might like.
There's that. Anything more you want to add before we?
I'm not going to plug the link, but as usual, Vomitorium tomorrow, Super Serial Showtime. We'll talk about movies, anime, comics, whatever comes up news-wise on that show. You guys can check us there on the Vomitorium Live at 8 p.m. Central. That's it.
All right. And let me just get these real quick, and then I'll have Elk. So then Jack Pastillo begins alienating the audience. So going back against the Rooster Teeth more and more, and I beat the Forest Temple. Where are all the
Oh, he's talking about Ocarina of Time. In my last show, he was playing Ocarina of Time, and he kept asking us what he was supposed to do in the game.
buy my book, buy my T-shirt. I think 8X was quoting you there, and then it's pronounced pastiche. Okay, all right. So okay, Elk, you're up.
Oh, I don't have anything to sell to the general public at this time. I am doing my own thing. I may in the future. And yes, it's pronounced pastiche. There you go. So, yeah, no, I don't have anything publicly to flog yet. Perhaps in the future it will be otherwise, but not now.
All right. So with that, then thank everybody for being here tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Of course, Rick, I'll send you the link tomorrow. For tomorrow night's show. Of course, we'll be back here with more Niche news tomorrow night, as well as will be this Friday, as Apex pointed out earlier. He will be co-hosting with me, as we'll be continuing our look back to March of 1940 of comics that went on sale in March of 1940. This week we'll be focusing on basically the books that eventually became part of Harvey Comics. They were known. They were being produced at the time by Brookworld and Worth Carnahan, respectively. Speed Comic Volume 1, Issue 8, and Champion Comics Volume 1, Issue 7. So with that, I thank everybody for being here, and I hope to see everybody back here tomorrow. Bye.
Later.